Chantel Cameron versus Melissa Hernandez. Let's talk about the fight. The first thing I'm going to say is that this was a fight that Chantel was obviously winning, and we'll get into why that was shortly. But I didn't agree with that referee stoppage. I didn't. I mean, I understand that it was all one-way traffic from the first round to the fourth round where the fight ended. But I think that Melissa Hernandez, given her veteran experience, deserved a little bit more consideration.
You know, I get that she was eating clean shots.
And I understand that the way things were going, it was conceivable that Melissa was going to get stopped if this fight goes on.
I get all of that.
But if you're like me, and you're actually familiar with Melissa Hernandez, the wars that she's already been in, coupled with other wars and other fights with other fighters we've seen before, where those fighters rallied back dramatically. The Corrales versus Castillo fight almost immediately comes to mind.
Remember that?
As an example of this, in spite of the fight's aesthetic and how things were going, I do feel that Celestino Ruiz, he pulled the trigger a little bit too quick. He stopped this thing a little bit too early. Just one man's opinion, feel free to disagree. As far as the fight itself and its aesthetic, Chantel Cameron's one-sided victory over Melissa Hernandez, it was the straight punches. It was the straight punches, the straight shots from the outside coming in. I talked about this in my prediction video. Chantel Cameron, being the taller fighter with the bigger wingspan, can comfortably lay into Melissa Hernandez with straight shots. And even though Melissa has great upper body movement and angles, ultimately it would be very difficult for Melissa to get off any shots of her own because of the discrepancy in height.
But maybe she can get around some of these punches.
Some of them, but getting off punches of her own would prove difficult for Melissa due to the discrepancy in height, due to the discrepancy in the fighter's wingspans. The jab, the straight jab, really was the ticket for Chantel Cameron. Educated use of the lead hand from the outside coming in. You'll notice that Chantel didn't overcommit to her shots. She wasn't hyperextending, wasn't lunging in. As
she let him go.
She let the lead hand go and followed up on it.
She'd throw 3-4 jabs out there.
And if Melissa tried to come back with something of her own, Chantel was far enough out of range behind the straight shots that all she'd have to do is take a half step back. Suddenly, Melissa's swinging at shadows. She's swinging at air.
She's not close enough to land anything.
And that goes back to what I told you guys before about the discrepancy in the fighter's height, the discrepancy in the fighter's reach, and the implementation of the fighters. That Chantel Cameron is a fighter that employs the lead hand and employs it often. Everything she does is off the jab.
And how that was going to be a problem for Melissa Hernandez.
Stinging jabs from Chantel Cameron in succession as she picked away at Melissa Hernandez, picked her apart, long distance.
Comfortably.
Choosing the right moments to let the backhand go, bring over the straight right, which found a home several times throughout the course of this match. It's important to note that it wasn't simply Chantel's height and Chantel's reach that won her the match so much as how she used it. She didn't give up her height. She didn't give up her reach. She didn't make things harder on herself, trading punches deep in the pocket. This was a fight that, for the most part, was fought long distance, long range, behind straight shots, making it very difficult for the much smaller fighter to get anything off, to get anything going. Punishing rounds for Melissa Hernandez against Chantel Cameron, who was not only fighting behind the straight shots, but fighting on the go. The movement, just as well as the straight punches, made things difficult for Melissa Hernandez. She couldn't pin down Chantel Cameron and get anything going because Chantel's light on her feet. She's moving around that ring. She's laying into you. And the second you try to step into a shot and come forward, she's out of there.
You know, I wasn't expecting a stoppage.
I thought that this would be a fight that might go the distance, might go the full 10 rounds. As we all know, it's 10 rounds for a championship women's boxing match, and I thought this would be one of those kinds of fights. I want to say there was a lot more on Chantel's punches than I expected. They really did seem to frazzle Melissa Hernandez.
Chantel can punch.
She is a heavy-handed fighter with a mean streak, and Melissa Hernandez got to find that out firsthand. Congratulations to Chantel Cameron, whose attention now turns to unifying the super lightweight division. Let's hope we can see Chantel back in the ring very soon against one of the other world champions in this division, of which there are 4, Chantel among them. We then come to the main event of that same card, the WBC lightweight title fight between Devin Haney, the reigning champion, and Jorge Linares. And I have to preface everything I'm about to say with this. When you watch a fight it leaves you with the impression that it leaves you. What you think during the fight and after the fight, that's what you think. I'm not in the business of apologizing for fighters or having to explain things away for them. That being said, the impression that I got from Haney versus Linares is that maybe Devin Haney has overstayed his welcome in the lightweight division, that perhaps constantly having to cut down to 135 pounds, Devin's a growing boy. His body's getting bigger, not smaller, and I think that's taking something away from his ability to perform, having to make that weight, 135 pounds. Perhaps it might be time to move up to 140, and that's another conversation entirely. What's he going to look like up there? It being that he's really not one of the bigger punchers in this division. Devin Haney's bread and butter is his boxing, not his brutality.
So let's make that crystal clear.
You could definitely argue that Devin has a high ceiling as a boxer. Maybe he's got better boxing acumen than Ryan Garcia. Maybe even more boxing acumen than Teofimo Lopez. It's in the air. We just don't know. But what he doesn't have is their punch. He doesn't have their one-hitter quitter power. He just doesn't have it.
If he did, I don't think this fight would have went the distance.
Because for the most part, he was boxing a beautiful fight against Jorge Linares, disarming him, beating him to the punch with the lead hand. Understand that Jorge has a bit of a reputation as a speedster, guy with fast hands. He's quick. It's one of his trademarks. That's one of his calling cards. But Devin's jab throughout the course of this match did effectively disarm Jorge.
Made things hard for Jorge.
What I noticed is Devin Haney was beating Jorge Linares to the punch. The very tough, very durable Jorge Linares, who I think a lot of people counted out ahead of this match. Myself, I was confident that Jorge has certain ingredients that could
Certain characteristics.
make things interesting. Those of you that follow the channel might have heard me say this in the build-up of the fight. I wonder how Devin Haney will take the shots from Jorge Linares, because Jorge is a very good puncher. Moreover, Jorge has one of the best straight right hands, I say, in this division. I think a lot of people were quick to count out Jorge Linares' ability based on what happened up there at 140 pounds with the journeyman Pablo Cano, who stopped Jorge Linares in one round. And I understand how that looks, I get it, but that was a 140-pound contest, not a 135-pound contest. At 135 pounds, Jorge is very formidable.
He is.
I mean, he's not a three-division champion, a former three-division champion, for no reason.
But people readily counted him out.
In watching this match, watching Devin Haney rip shots to Jorge Linares' body, I thought to myself, Jorge's in pretty good condition to be able to take those shots from a young, strong fighter like Devin Haney, a young, strong fighter with a high ceiling who's entering into his prime years as an athlete. I saw Devin Haney rip shots to Jorge Linares' body and thought to myself, you know what? Jorge's still got it.
Yeah.
You know what I thought to myself? I thought to myself in all my wisdom, I says, maybe Jorge's going to lose this Devin Haney fight. But I could still see Jorge beating other guys at this weight. I could still see Jorge beating the Emmanuel Tagos, maybe the Javier Fortunas of the world, beyond this contest, beyond this fight.
Even if he loses tonight.
And that sentiment is still evident the day after the fight on Sunday morning. Had to watch the fight again, as I lied farting on the floor, asleep, snoring, with the live stream still going. The night before, when the fight first aired, I had to watch it again this morning. Having seen it again, the thoughts that resonate with me the most is that
What does?
the aesthetic of this fight and how people felt viewing it had a lot more to do with how they felt about Jorge than how they felt about Devin. They're thinking to themselves that Devin should win this fight. He's going in there against this washed-up guy who isn't actually washed up. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Vasyl Lomachenko's win over Jorge Linares and what he did in that fight, picking himself up off the canvas, subsequently going on to stop Jorge Linares, who was the naturally bigger guy.
Right.
Vasyl Lomachenko doing this,
I don't think people interpreted that fight the right way.
you know, that was his first fight as a lightweight. That was his very first fight upon ascending to the 135-pound division. Him being able to do what he did to Jorge Linares was misinterpreted because at that time, Vasyl Lomachenko was a very polarizing figure. A lot of people felt that the pundits are overselling this fighter. He's really not that good. They're putting him in there with this guy, Jorge Linares, who ain't nothing to write home about. He ain't nothing special. And those people were wrong. They were wrong. Because if Jorge Linares were as washed up and no good as they said he was, and as they said he is ahead of this fight, he wouldn't have went the distance with Devin. He wouldn't have frazzled Devin off a quick salvo.
10th round.
He wobbled. Devin Haney, you saw it. You saw Devin stumble after that shot landed when he made his way back to his corner.
He caught Devin smack dab in his sweet spot.
Right on the kisser. Right on the chin. There's a feeling that Devin's performance lacked wow factor. There's a feeling that it was a lackluster showing for Devin in some circles. That's how some people are interpreting the match. And it's because here you have a common opponent between Devin Haney and Vasyl Lomachenko, who's a polarizing fighter. There are a lot of narratives associated with that fighter. And
Devin.
There are a lot of expectations of young Devin Haney, one of the lightweight division's young stars. In this situation, I feel so inclined to just focus on the boxing. I had a high opinion of Vasyl Lomachenko, I still do. I had a high opinion of Jorge Linares, and I have a high opinion of Devin Haney. That, yeah, Devin had to work for it, but he had to work for it because Jorge's a good fucking fighter. I never thought otherwise.
That's the main thing.
And so long as you keep this in mind, or kept it in mind ahead of this contest, you knew there's a chance Jorge can make things interesting for Devin because he's better than anyone that Devin has fought so far.
He undersold Jorge and oversold Devin.
The only reason that Jorge Linares, a very accomplished fighter in his own right, in his own respect, the only reason any of these individuals out there undersold Jorge as a fighter, the only reason they did that was to spite Vasyl Lomachenko for having beaten him. They wanted to downplay the victory, when in reality, that was a great win for a guy who just moved up to the lightweight division, stopping Jorge Linares in his very first fight at 135 pounds. Jorge's a good fighter. He's a good fighter when Vasyl Lomachenko fought him, and he was still a good fighter last night when Devin Haney fought him.
It was a good win for Devin to me.
The performance was somewhat less than perfect. Didn't have the wow factor of Ryan Garcia stopping Luke Campbell, but lest we forget, Ryan Garcia's best win is Luke Campbell, who was already beaten by Jorge Linares. Ryan Garcia, for all his wow factor and flashy knockouts, hand speed, he was actually supposed to fight Jorge Linares, and he pulled out of that fight for one reason or another. These are just the facts. So you want to keep these things in mind when Devin shares the ring with that same Jorge Linares.
Even if he does look less than perfect.
As you can safely say that, for the most part, he beat someone better than anyone you will find on Ryan Garcia's resume, or Gervonta Davis's lightweight resume as well. So we forget Gervonta Davis briefly campaigned here in the lightweight division. Listen, I don't think Devin Haney is a finished product. I think that there still is more work needs doing. This was a solid win, and he got some very good work from Jorge Linares, who I think is still a player at 135 pounds. He's still a solid guy and a formidable fighter at this weight. And so long as you keep these things in mind, it will calibrate your perspective. Devin didn't look perfect against Jorge, but you know what? Neither did Vasyl Lomachenko.
And that's because Jorge's a good fighter.
And finally, we come to the Showtime card that featured Nonito Donaire against the then unbeaten WBC bantamweight champion, Nordine Oubaali. And let me tell you,
wow,
sensational. Absolutely sensational. There are a lot of cliches in the sport of boxing. One in particular comes to mind here, that a guy's power, that really is the last thing to go. Nonito Donaire is 38 years old. Monumental career this fighter's had. Multi-weight champion. How many times has Nonito Donaire picked up a title, you know?
A lot.
And he's still doing it at 38 years old. 38 fucking years old. Against an unbeaten champion in Nordine Oubaali. This was a fight that was supposed to happen a long time ago, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the fight was pushed back, and it was pushed back considerably. Finally took place last night. I think that the height,
the reach,
and the punching power, what still is the punching power, the quality left hook of Nonito Donaire, I think that had everything to do with what we saw. Look, Nordine Oubaali, unbeaten champion, solid fighter, make no mistake.
He was.
Nordine Oubaali, in spite of being an unbeaten champion, was a less than perfect fighter, less than perfect in terms of defense. I didn't forget that Takuma Inoue fight of November
2019.
18 months ago. Fight that took place on the undercard of Donaire versus Inoue. That time, Nordine Oubaali, the then unbeaten defending champion, took on Naoya Inoue's younger brother, Takuma Inoue. And I didn't forget that Takuma was touching Nordine Oubaali with shots. And as he was touching him with shots, Takuma, who's not the biggest puncher, nowhere near as big a puncher as his brother, I thought to myself watching that fight, you know, the way this guy's getting touched, I don't like it. After the card, after the fights, I thought to myself, you know, if Nonito Donaire touches Nordine Oubaali on the chin, the way that Takuma Inoue was touching him on the chin, he might get a guy out of there. You know, he might be able to become a world champion again. He stands more than just a fighting chance of beating Nonito Donaire. That's what we saw last night.
We talked about it here on the channel several times.
That if anything remains of Nonito, if anything remains of his left hook, if anything remains of his punching power, if the Nonito Donaire that took on Naoya Inoue 17 months ago, if that guy shows up, Nonito Donaire in trouble. Big trouble. And that's what he was in the third round when he was dropped 3 times en route to being dropped again and stopped in the fourth round.
Off a big left uppercut.
Nonito Donaire is a world champion. Again, a 2-time bantamweight champion. And, you know, it's not because Nonito Donaire wasn't a good fighter. He was a good fighter. He beat Rau'shee Warren by way of a unanimous decision for the vacant title, subsequently defended the title 2 times successfully. So let's not take the piss. Let's not downplay the victory by downplaying Nonito Donaire fighting ability. Put simply, it's that Nonito was better, much better, because Nonito Donaire is, in fact, one of the best fighters in the world. He'd have to be 38 years old here today, still winning world titles.
Hall of Fame career.
Easily. I understand that some of you out there might have wondered what Nonito Donaire really had left because, you know, when he fought Ryan Burnett, Ryan was injured throughout the course of the match. And you know, it costed him the fight against Donaire. That's what happened, and that's how Donaire saw himself becoming a world champion again. He went into that Naoya Inoue fight, and I don't think a lot of people expected him to put up the fight that he did against Inoue. He fractured Inoue's orbital bone. I mean, if nothing else, you figured, watching that fight, that Nonito still got it. For him to be doing as well as he's doing against Naoya Inoue, this guy still got it. And that's what he brought to the table last night against Oubaali.
Bad motherfucker.